Hello, my name is Justin McClure, and I'm here today with
Will Sloan.
And you're listening to the Important Cinema Club. And today, things are going to get a little bit musical.
Heaven. I'm in heaven. That wasn't even in any of Vincent Minnelli's musicals.
I'm glad I pointed to you because I didn't even know what song I would sing. Because we're talking about Vincent Minnelli. Vincent?
Every time I heard somebody refer to him, it was Vincent Minnelli.
And he's the guy who made An American in Paris. He made The Bad and the Beautiful, Meet Me in St. Louis. He's one of the top guys when people talk about classic musicals, along with Stanley Donen, the guy that directed Singing in the Rain. Mm-hmm. And was he a filmmaker that you had any familiarity with, in the sense of like...
I had some familiarity with him because I'd probably seen half dozen movies over the years, but in no way am I an expert on him. In no way had I done much serious reading about him. So this is another one of those weeks, gang, where I'm a little bit of a fraud.
Well, listen, we can't do a podcast every week and be an expert on every subject.
Yeah.
So this is more of a discovery.
I watched 4 of his movies this week, and I've never seen a bunch of Vincent Minnelli movies back-to-back like this. Mm-hmm. And I feel, as it always does, it gave me a new appreciation for him as a filmmaker.
He's a filmmaker that people like Cage Cinema would always hold up as like a pinnacle of the auteurist theory.
So here are, I think, the 2 challenges for us going forward in this episode. One of the challenges with a guy like Minnelli is his movies are very collaborative. He is an auteur, but at the MGM musicals, so is Gene Kelly, so is Fred Astaire. These are guys who had a huge amount of input. And also, songwriters like Adolph Green and Betty Comden, and not to mention Arthur Freed, the guy who ran the unit. These are people who are as involved in the shaping of these movies as the director. And then the other challenge is, much of what's great about Vincent Minnelli is visual.
Yes.
And sensation. And it's hard to get into that without just listing off a bunch of colors and shapes and camera angles.
So Vincent Minnelli got his start working in like the theatrical milieu. He did a lot of like reviews and stuff like that on the stage, eventually moving his way up to Broadway, and his signature was his visual sense. At one point he was doing a pastiche of like flashbacks and the way that film look in the Hollywood system, and he coated everything in like clear plastic so it would have like a little out of focus look to it on stage.
Oh, that's amazing.
And like that's what he was known for, like costume design and the way that he would create visual images on stage. And the other weird thing about Vincent Minnelli is that he was also a pushover. If you read any biography about him, he's often a guy that would like toe the company line and wouldn't fight with the people that he was working with. And that's because, according to a lot of people that knew him, he was fairly inarticulate in the way that he spoke. And at the same time, while he knew what he wanted, he would approach it many different avenues. A lot of actors like Judy Garland, which he would later go on to marry, would complain that like he would ask her to do a line like, oh, could you just like soften it a little bit? Okay, now do it as if you're imagining that like you just saw your mother for the first time. And to the point that the actors sometimes didn't know what performance they were giving because there were so many different variations.
I'm not surprised that he was a largely kind of instinctive artist. I mean, as many, visual artists are.
And when people wrote about him, like in the American cinema, Andrew Sarris said that, he made beautiful movies, but there wasn't much of like a spirit behind them or something that influenced them.
I believe his exact words were, his art was more visual than personal, more decorative than meaningful, at least in the early stage of his career. In the early stage when he was doing musicals, and then later on he went into drama. But then Andrew Sarris also said, a rather beautiful turn of phrase, he believes implicitly in the power of his camera to turn trash into art and corn into caviar.
So like Will said, Minnelli would be given projects. Like it was very rare that he would chase after things. Like Freed, the producer that was working at MGM at the time, would call him up and be like, hey, we have this project, you want to do it? And he didn't really have much of a choice. He'd be like, yeah, okay, I'll do it.
Contract.
And then he would try to bring a visual sense in the way that he moved the camera and like the way that he portrayed the story to give it meaning or depth.
And I think he succeeded brilliantly at his best. Meet Me in St. Louis, or St. Louis, which is one of his most famous films, and which I think I like somewhat more than you.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of it.
But, that's a movie about the coming of age, really, and the loss of innocence of this wealthy Victorian-era family. And there's something in the visual style, the warmth but also the intensity of it. Like, it makes your eyes water a little bit, and it's so rich, but it looks almost like an idealized memory.
And that's a movie that Minnelli was given, and he read the script and he went, there's nothing here. Like, it's based on these famous short stories, but there's no through line and there's no emotional depth. So he had to bring that himself to the film. And that's probably the reason that it's remembered as fondly as it is.
The other reason I think it's remembered as fondly is because of Judy Garland, who is about as complex a screen presence as there is. I mean, she's somebody who can convey great warmth and great happiness, but there's also a real fragility to her.
Well, I think Meet Me in St. Louis is a good example, Louis. How are we supposed to say it?
I heard Martin Scorsese call it Meet Me in St. Louis, and yet when you watch the movie, it says Meet Me in St. Louis, Louis.
So who knows?
Yeah.
Obviously not Martin Scorsese.
Yeah, hack.
In Meet Me, you have what is this picturesque kind of, as you say, memory with all these complex characters kind of circling the narrative.
And every frame is so dense, you know.
And it's like you would expect, because it's a musical, it's a classic, that it's kind of emotional throughway would be simple, but it's not, because everybody is going through different stuff, including the kids, who are sociopaths, little kids, because they throw a dummy on a streetcar track, hoping that it will derail it and kill the people on it.
Well, it was a simpler time.
Yeah, that's right. Where the rich could get away with whatever they wanted to, as opposed to now.
When you were a kid, didn't you ever think of, like, you know, throwing a snowball onto a car as it was passing?
Never, but we did used to put stuff on train tracks just to see them explode. Until they put a fence up around the train track near my house, which I assume because they were tired of cleaning up apples and stuff like that off of the trains.
Wow. Don't you feel guilty? You're not going to look down on these beautiful little children in their stately, magnificent Amberson's home anymore, are you?
Who frame a man for, like, beating up a child.
Yeah. How about the part where Judy Garland sings "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas"?
I mean, that's the film's most famous moment, and the one that is the most misremembered, because it's a song that is usually sung very fondly. It's one that Judy Garland would go on to sing throughout her career, and that's what kind of popularized it. While in the film, she's singing it to a child who's weeping uncontrollably, which, according to Minnelli, he went and told the kid that if she doesn't perform, he'll kill a dog, and the dog will die a horrible death.
Oh, wow.
Because he was requested to do that by the kid's parents. And he promised after that he would never do that kind of emotional manipulation to get a performance.
Good. I think the movie conveys something about that sense of, like, all things must pass, and, you know, everything beautiful will end eventually.
But I don't get that feeling, because the film at the end of the day is about, oh no, we get to stay and we all get to be happy.
I was a little disappointed by that ending too.
If you look at most of Minnelli's films, if you cut out the last 5 minutes of almost all of them, they would be tragedies.
American in Paris.
Yeah, it's the exact same thing. We should talk about Minnelli's first film, Cabin in the Sky, because there's a few notable reasons that, like, it's actually really interesting. This was an adaptation of a Broadway play that actually didn't do that well, and is notable specifically that it has an all-black cast. There's not one white person in the movie. And Minnelli, when he was making it, he and the producers made a big kind of like publicity tour saying that they went to the NAACP to make sure that the script was, you know, not offensive. It wasn't Uncle Tomming it or anything like that. And there's something, I don't know, respectable about that, even though that the film is still racist and deals in stereotypes.
I think it's about as enlightened as you're going to get from
at that point
a
in
Hollywood
time.
studio movie
100%.
made by white people. It's got a great cast.
Yes, it does.
Led by Eddie Rochester Anderson from The Jack Benny Show. Also starring Lena Horne, really foxing it up as the town... what's a gentlemanly way to put it? The town bad girl.
Yeah, a woman of pleasure, I guess.
Yeah, and Ethel Waters. Ethel Waters plays the stern and strong wife of Rochester.
Yeah, who's smarter than anybody else and can trick them and just wants her husband to be happy. Even though that the film starts with him trying to go on the straight and narrow, stop his gambling and stuff like that, but he can't control himself and he ends up shot in a kind of borrow room brawl type situation.
And then the rest of the movie is the dispute between heaven and hell for Eddie Rochester Anderson's soul. And because of the power of Ethel Waters' praying, he's given a second chance. But, hell is always nipping at his heels, and he often finds himself tempted by Lena Horne.
And this is a film that, like, while I was watching it, it felt kind of weird. For the first 30 minutes, I could only think to myself, isn't this supposed to be a musical? And then I learned later on it's because they actually cut a bunch of musical numbers out of it.
There was originally a scene of Lena Horne in a bubble bath, I believe. But that was considered too risque.
Exactly. So that was cut out.
Although the movie is pretty frank about sex, I think, or about as frank. And maybe, I don't know, I'm just talking out of my ass here, but I would speculate it might be like the sexual relationship between Rochester and Lena Horne is more implied because they're black, right? Like they're allowed to be a little franker.
And while it does take the moralistic idea that, like, jazz music is bad or going to the bar is bad and you'll end up in hell, if you do these things, it also takes joy in that as well.
Yeah.
Like Duke Ellington is on stage performing. So it's like, oh, wait, isn't this fun stuff that you should go do? And the fact that it has no white cast allows it to feel very organic. I mean, there's one scene where a song is portrayed and suddenly a bunch of stereotypes just come into frame and kind of dance around with them, which is probably the film at its worst. But at its best, it shows strong characters wanting to do the right thing and finding clever ways to get around, like, going to hell.
And everyone's funny, and they give good performances, and great music.
And you can see Minnelli already using his cameras in ways to kind of raise the material higher than you would expect something like this, which could have just been like a throwaway thing. Like, he is invested in this project and making these musical numbers and this story, which has all these fantastical elements, work within itself. And just like all of Minnelli's films, if you cut out the last few minutes, it would be a tragedy. But no, at the end, there's a happy ending, and everybody lives happily ever after.
A movie that I watched this week that I really liked a lot was The Band Wagon from 1953, starring Fred Astaire. This is kind of a meta movie. As I understand, it was very much made in the spirit of Singin' in the Rain, which came out a year or two before, in this kind of a meta showbiz satire inspired by the circumstances of its own making.
So this was the first Minnelli film I saw years and years ago, and while I loved all the musical numbers, as a director, it made me think that Minnelli was just kind of a, just put the camera here and shoot it, no sense of narrative logic, because this is essentially a review where the film will stop for like 20 minutes to show an amazing film noir pastiche dance number.
I mean, I like that about it because, first of all, I find the plot quite charming. The Fred Astaire Ginger Roger movies were never big favorites of mine. I mean, the dancing's great, but the stuff in between the dancing kind of gets on my nerves.
Shoe leather.
Yeah. But this one, I think it's quite cute and funny throughout. But I mean, it is like a grab bag of delights. All these little musical scenes. Because the plot is Fred Astaire plays a washed up movie star, not unlike Fred Astaire himself. Although in real life, he was still popular.
Yeah, he was kind of semi-retired at the point that he made The Band Wagon. Fred Astaire's like late career is him always coming back to do more movies.
But he's somewhat washed up, but then he gets approached to do a big comeback on Broadway, and they enlist his co-star to be, the young hotshot Broadway star of the moment, who apparently was based on Jose Ferrer.
Oh, okay.
Although he comes across much more like Orson Welles. And this young hotshot, who's also the director, insists on, instead of having it be like a fun review, it has to be a dark and gloomy modern-day Faust story.
Yeah.
And that flops, and so then they take it on the road and turn it back into a fun musical review. And it climaxes with this absolutely amazing 5 or 10 minute musical scene.
The thing that the movie is famous for, which is like a pastiche to like film noir, where it's just Fred Astaire getting in these expressionist tableaus and dancing his ass off.
Yeah, he plays a detective who goes into this bar, and the bar is rendered on this pink set, pink floor, pink backdrop, and it has a couple of very minimalist pieces of set that are purple.
It's like just dazzling to see on screen. And I wish, as a musical director, which Minnelli was famous for, there was more of that in his movies. Because I was actually, as I was doing research for this episode, a little bit underwhelmed at the impact that his musicals had on me. Like something like Meet Me in St. Louis is a very grounded musical. It's almost diegetic in the way that people sing the songs. Like you could almost buy it as if they were just singing like you would, like a normal family would together.
I mean, I think that's part of the appeal of the movie, though, right? Like, it's a movie where the songs advance the narrative, the songs express the emotions of the characters.
Those are my favorite ones. But I like it when musical numbers kind of break the reality of the film that they're in to tell those stories. Basically, the old adage of, if you're so emotional that you can't say it in words, you have to sing it.
Sure.
So that can break the logic of what's happening. While other than The Bandwagon and An American in Paris, his musicals are more grounded in that way, from what I've been able to see. I mean, I'm sure he has more minor ones that like have great numbers in them, but there's none that are like that masterpiece around it. Because when people usually talk about that masterpiece that Vincent Minnelli made, they talk about An American in Paris,
which I think is good. I didn't love it.
So watching all these movies back to back bring something very clear of something that Minnelli went to over and over again, is that men are pieces of shit. That's almost present in all of his films, which is unfortunate because the stars are men and they're the one leading the picture. Like An American in Paris, which won Best Picture the year that it came out, ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, Singing in the Rain, which came out a year later, is a lot better.
It's about Gene Kelly playing a hack artist who paints like backgrounds and stuff like that.
And he is an American in Paris. He goes to Paris with the hope that the great masters would rub off on him.
Is courted by a very nice lady who's treated like an old hag, who's very rich. But no, Gene Kelly falls in love with a younger woman from Paris, and they barely know anything about each other, but it's true love in the ways that movie can only do it.
But then there are some entanglements with Gene Kelly's friend, and
it all climaxes in the reason the film is so famous, which is a like expressionist ballet that happens in the last 18 minutes of the movie.
And this ballet won a Special Academy Award.
Did it?
Yes.
That's okay.
Why did they even give it Best Picture after that?
Like, the Academy Awards just make up like Oscars so they can give it away to something that's popular and that they believe has value. Like, An American in Paris is just so light and flighty, and even the musical numbers throughout are fine, but they don't like blow me away in something like Singing in the Rain, where like you see those musical numbers and you're like, wow, like that is amazing.
Yeah. Well, American in Paris has got some really good ones. It's got a very charming number where he's dancing with the
kids. That
kids.
One's really fun. Yeah.
There's the one where he's dancing in his apartment.
Yes.
And you know, Minnelli, even though he often does complicated camera work and complicated editing, he also knows when to like set the camera down.
Yeah, do the Fred Astaire, bring it back, show the whole body so you can see someone like Gene Kelly just do their stuff.
Or there's a moment in that scene when he dances out into the hallway and the camera just does this almost imperceptible like swerve as it follows him in a way that doesn't really call attention to itself.
I don't know, I wish I liked it more, but when you have something like Singing in the Rain, which came out a year later, which is just so much better on every level.
Well, Singing in the Rain also has a particular spirit to it. It feels like everyone's having a lot of fun. It feels like there's a spontaneity there. This is like an alchemy that can't be calculated.
Yeah, and it seems like Minnelli is often sweating to get that on screen.
There's a self-importance to An American in Paris that isn't there in Singing in the Rain. But maybe one thing I would say in addition about Minnelli's musicals, there's a good quote from Martin Scorsese, because I'm stitching together my opinions about Minnelli from the opinions of other people who know him better. But Martin Scorsese...
You can have an opinion, Will. You watch these movies. You can talk about it.
Scorsese said, Minnelli's musicals celebrated the triumph of the imaginary over the real. Any aspect of reality, no matter how trivial, can be transformed, stylized, or incorporated into a ballet.
And Scorsese, New York, New York, the movie that he made that was the famous flop, is just a flat-out homage to the work of Vincent Minnelli.
I think at his best, Minnelli, his films look like, you know, putting on Minnelli goggles and seeing the world through it. You can, like, in that big ballet sequence at the end of An American in Paris, this is his crazy version of Paris. Or the scene in The Bandwagon when Fred Astaire is wandering around 42nd Street, and he goes to, what looks like the Ripley's Believe It or Not place, and he gets into the dance with the shoe shine guy played by Leroy Daniels. Like, it's his hyper stylized, poeticized version of 42nd Street.
Yeah, but when you say something like that, it's just like, I wish there was just a little bit more. Like, I wish he just pushed it a little bit further. And I think one of the reasons that energy is not always there and that it just pops up every now and then is that because he was a company man that was like towing that company line. And you couldn't have a picture that was crazy throughout, because then you would lose your audience.
Yeah.
Like, I read a biography on Minnelli this week called Minnelli, the Dark Dreamer. It does not live up to that subtitle.
Okay.
But, like, it continually just enforces the idea that Minnelli, like, just did whatever people told him, to the point that he actually took the studio side when Judy Garland, who he was married to, was having, like, manic and depressive episodes. He's like, oh, it's not the studio's fault. It's like, you just need to get help, because the studio was the one that was telling him what to do. If you want to read like a sad showbiz, personal life, read Minnelli's, because
I think he didn't really regard himself as an auteur the way people later would. He regarded himself
as a journeyman.
Yeah, and as a stylist.
Yeah.
But I also think Minnelli's musicals have a personality and a visual sense to them that really separates them from, say, Stanley Donen's musicals. Like in The Band Wagon or in An American in Paris, whenever there's a musical sequence, the sequences are just so dense, whether it's visually, but also in terms of the action on screen. That 42nd Street musical number in The Band Wagon, there's just so much stuff going on, and that's Minnelli's Rococo sense.
Yeah, I think that Minnelli's experience working in the theatrical kind of world translates very well to the screen. You see this a lot with people that worked on the stage.
Because they've got a whole stage to fill.
Exactly. And they're trying to, like, with the shifting camera, show different information, and that if you saw the play twice, you would see different stuff. Or you could be looking at it from different angles. And that makes it very dynamic in a way that, like, Minnelli is super interesting. Like, you feel that his camera is always on a crane moving to capture the action, because it's always trying to give you a different bit of information for you to kind of swallow.
And I could watch like the last 20 minutes of An American in Paris probably 5 times in a row.
And you would get something different each time. Like, compared to something like La La Land, which is just ripping it off, that ending, and how complex An American in Paris is. Because even in the way that he stages stuff, you're like, wait, what is going on? Why is that happening?
Yeah.
And I'm sure that he's figured it all out, but because there's so much information, you're overwhelmed.
It's too much to take in, almost.
So, while it sounds like I may be kind of like a little bit negative on Vincent Minnelli, his film The Bad and the Beautiful, which he made in 1952, which was a straight-up drama, is one of my favorite films about Hollywood, especially classic Hollywood, that I've ever seen. I love this movie.
Well, this is a movie that's made for movie buffs like us, because even as you watch it, if you know a lot about movies, you can... Like, it's full of all the archetypes where you can be like, oh, this is Val Lewton, this is Orson Welles, this is Alfred Hitchcock, that's John Barrymore.
The film stars Kirk Douglas as a washed-up producer when the film starts, who gets 3 people that he worked with throughout his career: a director, a leading lady, and also his lover, and a screenwriter, and gets them together to have a little bit of a Citizen Kane-like flashback structure.
I was wondering if there was a Citizen Kane influence on this, and then I saw Paul Stewart from Citizen Kane appears in it.
Vincent Minnelli said that Orson Welles was one of his favorite directors of all time, and that the movie was actually a homage to Citizen Kane.
And there's quite a bit of Orson Welles, I think, in Kirk Douglas's performance. Kirk Douglas, I think, is mostly based on David O. Selznick, but the swagger he has is definitely Welles.
And the way that it tells a story of how creative people kind of work with each other is fascinating, because Kirk Douglas is the ultimate super charismatic, passionate person that is also self-destructive and will leave people close to him behind to reach the goals that he wants.
I mentioned that one of the challenges with dealing with Minnelli is how collaborative his films are. And, The Band Wagon and this one are both about the collaborative process. I mean, I guess it was something he was very attuned to.
And the way that one singular figure could then destroy the other people to get the attention of it.
Yeah. So Kirk Douglas stars as Jonathan Shields, hotshot producer who made his bones in Hollywood by producing low-budget horror films like Revenge of the Catman.
Which was made famous by not showing the Catman, which is the exact same story that happened with Val Lewton and Jacques Tourneur when they made the Cat People.
And there's a beautiful scene when Kirk Douglas is explaining his concept for the movie, where he's like, what's the thing people are most afraid of? And then he turns off the light, and then he turns on a little lamp, and he lights his face, and he goes, darkness. And I love this moment because it's like one great stylist paying tribute to another great stylist. So that becomes a big success, and the director that he works with,
Fred Emile,
played by Barry Sullivan, pitches him the idea of an adaptation of this great, almost unfilmable work of literature, which Kirk Douglas says, yes, we're going to do this. I'm going to cash in all my chips and finally make this, but also you're fired. We're getting a better director for it.
An Otto Preminger-like figure, if you will. And after that, we get the story of an actress, Georgia, played by Lana Turner, who she and Kirk Douglas get a muse kind of artist relationship, and he picks her out of like the crowd where she plays in bit parts, and she's mostly drunk, and kind of cleans her up and makes her a star in a costume drama.
And she was living in the shadow of her John Barrymore-ish father.
So as you can see from all the names that we're dropping, this is a film in love with the idea of Hollywood, using all these famous stories to tell this bigger story about one man played by a scenery-chewing Kirk Douglas.
And the last story of the movie is this great novelist who Kirk Douglas has lured to Hollywood to write a screenplay, and he thinks that his wife, played by Gloria Graham, is too much of a distraction, so he gets his wife to go have an affair with this other guy, and they get in a plane crash. And so that's why the screenwriter is bitter to him. So
the structure of the movie is the three kind of vignettes where you're just waiting for Kirk Douglas to do something bad that will make this person turn against him. And it's kind of fascinating to follow that journey, because at some point you're like, well, what could he do that would make them angry? And well, Kirk Douglas is playing a self-destructive Orson Welles-like figure, so of course that he'll cheat on them, or he'll betray them, or he'll reveal that the nicety that he had was just hiding other secrets. And I think the movie really takes its temperature from Kirk Douglas's performance. It's pitched really high. The camera is always moving. It's always showing off. There's always some crazy visual thing that he's doing. Even like a tiny moment, like there's a scene where Kirk Douglas has 3 giant stacks of scripts on his desk, and it cuts to it, and you see the scripts, then you see him emerge from behind the scripts. Even like just a throwaway moment like that, there's always some piece of visual imagination. This is a film that I only came to because I heard Martin Scorsese talk about it like so lovingly, and he also talked about like that the sequel of the film, where Kirk Douglas plays a very similar character that goes to Italy to do dubbing on a movie called 2 Weeks in Another Town, was also a poster that like Scorsese put up on his wall when he moved to Hollywood, because he imagined that these movies represented the idealized version of Hollywood for him. I mean, I think what Scorsese likes about these movies is the idea of these like big, bold creatives who are doing big, bold, creative things. And at the same time, they're also pieces of shit. Yeah. Because like Kirk Douglas is not a good man. He is very, very bad. Yeah. And, you know, Scorsese also regards filmmaking as a mode of personal expression, and you know that's one of the conflicts that's at the heart of this movie. You know, at this stage in Hollywood, the producer was stronger than the director, and you know one of the subplots of the movie is that the Alfred Hitchcock-like filmmaker has a big falling out with him on the set of one of the movies because he can't function under his supervision. And it's like how creative can you be in this system? You know, and that leads to probably the film's best kind of payoff, which is that this big creative hands-on super producer is a shitty director and doesn't understand what makes it work. Yeah, and that's really interesting, like kind of just as a meditation on the artistic process. I think that The Bad and the Beautiful will be the first movie I would give to people if they were interested in like Vincent Minnelli's work beyond the most famous musicals, because it is pitched at such a high level, and it has all the things that he obviously loves about movies and being creative in a package that also reflects the reasons that people would get into Vincent Minnelli, because they like the idea of this Hollywood, which was actually incredibly toxic. Sure. Yeah. So after The Bad and the Beautiful and An American in Paris, Vincent Minnelli continued to work. He became the kind of darling of French auteur theorists, but he never really had like the big hit.
And I think his most of his dramas were not all that well received in his lifetime. I know that some of them have, like Some Came Running, for instance.
Some Came Running is great.
Yeah. Some of them have risen in esteem, but they were not great successes. And then he eventually returned to the musical genre, also with
Barbra Streisand.
With Barbra Streisand.
Yeah, which, come on, that's like a loaded dice. He can't win with that one. Like an older man trying to like revitalize his career with something that is like in the next generation. I haven't actually seen the movie that they made together, but you know, maybe it's great. I am 100% certain it has revisionist historians on it.
Sure.
So the question, like we always ask ourselves, is Vincent Minnelli an auteur? And when you ask that question, you also have to ask, like, what does auteur mean? Does it mean that there's value in every one of his films? That he's repeating thematic concerns?
Thematic concerns are going to be hard when we're talking about this guy. I mean, I know that in Andrew Sarris's book, he talks about how the movies got darker as he went along. You know, Gigi and An American in Paris are much darker musicals than what came before, and that led into the darker dramas.
Brigadoon,
yeah. See,
the darkest of the musicals. Not really.
It doesn't really hold up to scrutiny, does it?
No, it doesn't.
But I definitely think he has a particular way of looking at the world. And his movies, at their best, are just wonderful machines of pleasure.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so letters this week. As usual, you can send us a letter at importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. The first letter is from Jessen Fox. Hello, cinephile friends. Will and Justin. Well, today's the day. I finally work up courage to write in. I have to say, having my name read aloud during the Patreon list certainly motivated me. I appreciate the recognition, and I am pleased to support the show financially.
Thank you.
Now, on to my letter. Your podcast often turns me onto films I know nothing about, and the episode about Harold Lloyd was no different. It was the first silent film I'd ever seen outside of The Artist, and I thought it had great gags and was well made. I was, however, disappointed to find that this film featured some offensive blackface. I watched it with a friend who is black, and it was shocking and embarrassing to expose them to that unknowingly. I guess you can't expect much from a 100-year-old film, but that still sucked to see show. As a big fan of you two, and you do seem like thoughtful dudes, could you please give a heads up in the future when recommending films that may feature offensive imagery as such?
Which movie was it?
He doesn't mention it here. When you're watching films like before the 50s, I guess?
Yeah.
That offensive, in-your-face stuff is usually present. Me and Will, if stuff like this comes up in some of the feature films that we're talking about, we will try to mention it to people. But this brings up a good question about, like, showing films to other people and, like, what steps you take before you watch that film. Because it's a real tricky thing, because if the film that you picked and you show to someone has offensive stuff in it, or is even not good, like, you're the one to blame for it.
Yeah, we've all
been there.
Been there, yeah. That's a bad feeling. I know there are certain movies that I really love that if I see them, you know, at a repertory movie theater or something, there will always be one or two, not always, but there may sometimes be one or two moments that I dread a little bit so there's a scene in Duck Soup, one of my very favorite movies, when Groucho makes a joke about a then current song called That's How Darkies Were Born or something like that. And, you know, even if you know the context of that gag, it's not a very good gag. And he sets it up with this monologue like, oh, the Headstrongs met the Armstrongs, and that's how darkies were born. And it always lands with a thud, and I always dread that whenever I watch Duck Soup. I think we also maybe have experiences of putting on a movie that we remember loving, and then either we've changed or the times have changed, or it's just like, I don't know if you've watched Chasing Amy recently.
Oof, yeah. That movie doesn't really hold up. It's weird because, like, when that happens and you can feel the person you're with kind of, like, turn to look at you and be like, why are you showing me this film? Like, it's so offensive, or there's bad stuff in it. And you're like, well, I remember liking it, or I heard that it was good.
Yeah.
There's, like, almost no way around it other than watching the film before you watch it with someone else.
All I can say about blackface is, like, classic films offer many rewards, but that's something you're going to have to be prepared for.
So you either you go in Probably my suggestion would be that if you're showing like a classic film like that to someone, just ask them like, this is probably going to feature some stuff that's like really offensive. Are you okay watching it with that in mind?
Yeah.
Because they may just be like, you know what? That may be a little bit uncomfortable. I don't want to do that. Then you're like, okay, no problem. Let's watch something else. Birth of a Nation. I hear this one's a classic.
There's a Fred Astaire movie. I don't think it's Swing Time. I can't remember which one it is, but there's a Fred Astaire movie where he does a whole musical number in blackface. It's one of the major ones, too.
Holiday Inn. Or even like a movie that seems super easy and fun, like the Mickey Rooney picture Babes in Arms, which is all about kids showing adults how like times have changed and that they should grow up, ends with Mickey Rooney putting on a blackface musical number.
Man, I saw Babes in Arms on public television in the 90s when I was a kid. Could you imagine that showing on public television now?
No, never. It would never
20 straight minutes of minstrel show.
And the letter finishes up. That being said, you talked about how Harold Lloyd failed to make the transition to talkies. Who is someone that did the transition well from that era? And anyone else you feel transitioned well from one era of film to another? Really love the podcast, y'all. Sorry for such a long message, but it was my very first. Look forward to your thoughts. Your pal, Jessen.
Laurel and Hardy, I guess, probably did even better in the sound era.
Hitchcock did very well transitioning from silence to the sound era.
Yeah, good for him. I mean, Chaplin sort of was able to, he was so rich and he could
do whatever he wanted.
Yeah.
But even he kind of struggled afterward, didn't he, with the idea of sound? Because a lot of the people working in the silent film era, sound was such a threatening thing that completely changed how they made movies.
I understand that Buster Keaton was very excited by the idea of sound. He didn't plan to do much talking in his own movies, but he was excited by the idea of having sound crashes and stuff like that, just as a whole other group of tools in his arsenal.
Well, it's a shame he ended up working for a studio that completely crushed his spirit.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the letter, and moving on. And the next letter goes, love the show. What a great subject line.
Yeah.
Hi, Justin and Will. Greetings from Australia, a.k.a. the Canada of the South.
Nice.
Has it been called that?
That's not a knife.
Classic Australian bit.
Yeah.
Thanks for turning me on to a bunch of directors I would otherwise have neglected. Edgar G. Ulmer, Ed Wood, and Guy Maddin in particular. I wonder if you have considered doing an episode on everyone's favorite psychomagical scallywag, Alejandro Jodorowsky. I myself still don't know what to make of him after seeing 4 of his films, so I wonder what he means to you guys, if anything. Sincerely, Charlie.
I'm a fan.
I'm a fan as well.
Yeah.
It was much easier to talk about him when he had seemingly disappeared 10 years ago, and now he's all over the place.
Some of his voodoo-ish, weird mysticism stuff isn't for me, but I thought Dance of Reality was really good.
And I'm a huge fan of El Topo.
Yeah.
The Holy Mountain, I appreciate, but yeah. It's a bunch of crazy imagery.
I love The Holy Mountain.
Do you?
Yeah, and I think it's just amazing that it exists.
Mm-hmm. And that it was funded by the producer of the Beatles.
I mean, it's unfathomable to me that a movie can have that much stuff in it.
So much stuff in it.
Yeah.
Have you ever listened to the commentary track Jodorowsky does, where he just explains the meaning behind everything as it comes up on screen?
Because it's not a very dialogue-heavy movie either.
No.
Yeah.
And Charlie continues his letter. P.S. As a long-term fan and short-term Patreon subscriber, I can confirm I was only getting half the Important Cinema Club experience until I recently stopped being such a Scrooge. The episode on Bodied was a wonderful collision of worlds for me as a battle rap fan, and I can't wait until it reaches our shores.
Wow.
Well, thank you very much. And, people who aren't Patreon subscribers.
Yeah, did you hear that?
Yeah, only half of the experience.
You're getting some really good battle rap information behind the paywall.
From the 2 battle rap experts, Justin DeClue and Will Sloan. And by that I mean not at all. Don't get your hopes up, guys. This week on our Patreon, we did a special episode to honor the... the release of Eli Roth's Death Wish. We end up talking about Bruce Willis and the nature of revenge films. And, spoiler, did we like the new Death Wish movie?
You'll have to find out.
So, I guess not a spoiler at all. No, we didn't like it. Come on. Yeah. So, you just want to hear us talk about why it's not good? Get the Patreon episode.
Now it's time for How Did This Get Made?
I just want to thank Patreon subscribers, because obviously it makes a difference, because this guy wrote us a letter. So, just to thank all of our new Patreon subscribers, they include Ziad, Lynn, Justin, Jesse, Amy, Brian, Jordan, Charlie, Sean, Yoon, Tom, Sean, and Serena. Thank you very much for becoming Patreon subscribers, and I apologize if I missed somebody. Next week, we're going to be doing an episode on outsider filmmakers. Now, I'm not going to mention who we'll be talking about because it's a surprise, but it will be tying into the What the Film Festival that I am co-hosting with Peter Kaplowski, which is happening March 24th and 25th at the Royal Cinema.
And I just want to say, unless you're really deeply immersed in, the things that Justin likes, you probably haven't heard of.
No, you will be very surprised about the main person that we'll be talking about.
So don't bother trying to guess. You're not going to get it.
I mean, if you follow my Twitter, you will probably know.
Okay.
Because I do tweet about this person quite a bit. As per usual, you can follow our Twitter at mine is DeClueJ.
And mine is Will Sloan ESQ.
And you can follow me on Letterboxd as well at Justin DeClue. And you can also check the notes on this episode by visiting filmtrap.com, and you'll see it right there on the main page. My name's Justin DeClue.
I'm Will Sloan.
Thanks for listening. So I saw Death Wish in theaters the way that it was meant to be seen, and I was on Letterboxd trying to give it a star rating, and I was like, should I give it 2 stars or 2.5 stars?
Whoa, that's not the direction I thought you were going to go.
Well, you thought it was going to be like a 5-star, man?
No, I thought it was going to be 2 stars or 1.5, which is the rating I landed on.
And it made me think, like every time where I'm on Letterboxd trying to pick a star rating, what defines the stars that I choose?
So I just gave the Band Wagon 4.5 stars on Letterboxd.
Yeah.
And then I thought, why not just 5? I mean, what's keeping me from giving it that extra half star? And then I thought, well, maybe I just haven't lived with the movie long enough. Then it'll be a 5 movie.
But it'll never be a 5 movie if you've lived with it long enough, because usually 5 stars comes out of like, wow, that was amazing, 5 stars.
Not always. Oftentimes for me, 5 stars comes out of a longer
like
term.
Nostalgia?
Well, no, like living in a movie for a much longer time. There are definitely movies that over the years I've come to love more and more.
I'm a real 3.5 star kind of guy if I like a movie. The non-committal, like, oh, I liked it and you should watch it, but you're not going to love it. At some point in my mind, I made a decision that, like, 3 stars, if you like this kind of stuff, you can watch it. If you have like a lazy Sunday afternoon, 3.5, I would recommend it to you to watch it.
With reservations.
With not even that many reservations. 4 stars is like, oh, you should watch it even if you don't like this kind of stuff. And above that, it's like, why aren't you watching this yet?
But the distinction between 4.5 and 5 to me is very arbitrary.
Yeah, well, 5 is probably just like perfect, right?
Right.
So that gets people like all ready to type out a response like, how dare you give this 5 stars? When I look on Letterboxd about a movie I want to watch, I genuinely look at people's star ratings and I go, oh, okay, then I'll watch it. Because as much as you'll complain about it, and I'm sure both of us, when we started writing about film, we were like, well, I'm not going to give anything a numerical value.
Right.
You can just get it from reading my writing if you should watch it or not.
But that said, star ratings are fun.
Yes.
And like, we all know what a Roger Ebert 3-star movie is.
What is it?
Okay, well,
Shaolin Soccer?
So I forget who it was, so apologies, but I saw somebody on Twitter a few months ago say The Foreigner with Jackie Chan is a classic Roger Ebert 3-star movie. And I thought, absolutely right. But then I saw somebody else point out that Ebert would have definitely given 4 stars to 3 billboards outside of Ebbing, Missouri. And I thought, that's absolutely right, too.
And at the same time, star ratings only exist to make people angry. Like, it's very rare that, like, you'll read a critical review unless it's, like, completely out of this world. And you'll be like, ooh, I'm going to reply to this. But you see someone give, like, 5 stars to, like, even 3 billboards or something like that. And you're like, what the hell?
I respect a guy like Jay Hoberman, where he'll write a long review and you'll read it and you'll be like, I don't even know if that was thumbs up or thumbs down.
Yeah, and he definitely does not give star ratings to stuff.
I like Jonathan Rosenbaum's rating system because it's a little bit pretentious.
Oh, I don't even know what it is.
Because it's 4 stars masterpiece, 3 stars must see, 2 stars worth seeing, 1 has redeeming facet.
And wait, so...
and then 0 is worthless.
Okay.
I just like that has redeeming facet. I also like, they don't do this in Film Comment anymore, but in their DVD section, they used to have a list of, top 20 releases, and then they had a release of recommended, and then they had a list of interest.
I love that idea that all of these movies should be watched, even though they're not that good, because you're going to get value out of that.
And then you can see, like, what's in the of interest. It might be something like Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland. And then you see that, and it's like, okay, it's of interest because he's an auteur.
I guess.
Yeah.
But you know that you're not going to watch it because it is in that section.
I just kind of like the snootiness of that of interest.
You know, you should watch it because there's this brilliant 2-minute segment that really represents them as an artist. But it made me think of this as well, the star rating stuff, because like Netflix has been dropping these movies, and there's no time for any kind of like critical reaction. So like people hate it, so everyone's giving it like 1.5 star because it's like this mob mentality like going up against it. And you know, I'm not gonna sit here and defend the Cloverfield paradox. The movie is bad, but it's fascinating to see people be like, oh, it's shit, and as a reader you're instantly tuned into it because of that star rating.
Well, also, I mean, everyone has remarked upon this, that people, especially on Twitter, want something to be a masterpiece or want something to be terrible. I mean, the fact that a movie like Three Billboards or a movie like Louis C.K.'s I Love You Daddy, like the reaction was so rapturous before, and then all of a sudden it flipped absolutely in the opposite direction, and there was no possibility for anything in between.
It was crazy. It was like almost instant, like boom.
It's like, this movie would have been bad even if the scandal didn't happen.
You know what? I'm giving this 0 stars.
Yeah.
And I'm not defending Louis C.K.'s film or even Three Billboards.
It's just instructive, though, that the reaction was so favorable a week before, and then, you know.
But Letterboxd, I think, as a platform is very important for the crazy reviewer, and you'll see them whatever movie you click, like the people who give every Paul W.S. Anderson film like 5 stars.
Well, these are people who are, in my opinion, kind of play acting and being like great critics. Like there are certain people who have clearly read their Hoberman and read their Richard Brody or something, and they're kind of posturing in that direction.
And people like friends will message me and go, look at this crazy review, and I'll just go, okay, you probably just read the first few sentences and then looked at the star rating, but like read the review, and it is so disconnected from any kind of reality.
Oh, you know what they're doing? They're imitating Jean-Luc Godard at Cahiers du Cinema.
Yeah.
Because you'll see something like, with War of the Planet of the Apes, Matt Reeves, is that who directed it?
Yeah.
Matt Reeves achieves Murnau-like effects with light and shadow.
And you're like, what the fuck are you talking about?
And that's just like pretending to be Godard.
But
that's cosplay.
What do these people, like, what do they want to get out of it? I guess, like, other like-minded individuals where it doesn't matter what you're writing as long as it's kind of wordy and weaves around a maze that leads nowhere.
Well, and maybe, honestly, maybe we're not exempt from this because, like, you know, we have a whole fucking podcast where we put our opinions on the internet, but you know, people like to create something that they think is in the tradition of the thing they aspire to.
So you don't think that they go, oh, this is how I actually feel about this movie. It's more like in the Cage Cinema style that we need a review that takes this position.
I think it's complicated.
Yeah.
I don't want to do a complete bad faith assumption that they don't like something, but I also think
you just need to read the review.
But you know what? There are a lot of factors influencing why we like something. Like oftentimes the reaction to something will be so in one direction that our contrarian impulse will be a bit like, So you know, these are the sorts of factors that influence.
I think you're giving a little bit too much good faith because you read these reviews and you're like, what? Like, this is from nowhere.
But also people who write those reviews also like to think, well, I'm a idiosyncratic thinker.
I remember at one point...
Because that's a flattering and nice thing to think about oneself.